Leviticus 26, it says God's going to walk among us. So how do we reconcile all that?
You mentioned on the call about Jesus being possibly a curse sent from God.
Yes, that's right. So that's one of the things as far as Jesus bringing a sword is Jesus an instrument of God to bring a punishment?
Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A, coming to you from the Holy Land. Rabbi, the man, the myth, the legend, Rabbi Tovia Singer. Welcome back, my dear brother. How are you today?
Doing well.
Good.
Yeah, things in Jerusalem are just topping. Beautiful. Very nice. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, there is a text form, if you don't mind. I'm going to read off to you, only because I've never actually heard this question before from anybody I know anyhow. So let me start with this off. First, I want to put our happy names up there so everybody knows who they're staring at if they're new to the channel. There we go. Okay, here we go. With all due respect, Rabbi, for I value your wisdom, sincerity, and great knowledge on most of what you say. Love the undertone. But I have got to tell you, without malice and in all sincerity, that your long-awaited Messiah is pie in the sky, a myth akin to Christian myth, their Lord Jesus. Never going to happen. Could you respond to that, young man, please?
You know, I receive many questions like that, and it leaves me scratching my head because it's a non sequitur. Meaning, in very simple terms, let me just say this in a way that'll make a lot of sense to people. Judaism can be true and Christianity false. Christianity can't be true and Judaism false. So non sequitur, fallacy, means it doesn't follow. Christianity is, this is just to begin with, Christianity is an accretion on top of Judaism. In the same way that the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints is an accretion on top of Orthodox Christianity, let's just say, right? So it doesn't follow, and I don't get why people make that assertion, that because the claims of the Christian religion are untenable, therefore the claims of Judaism are untenable as well. So the therefore doesn't work. See, Christianity, the religion, is making truth claims that that Jesus is the Messiah, and they're stating, its most sacred literature is stating that the proof and truth of Christianity can be validated, could be supported, is bolstered by the Hebrew Bible, explicitly. Luke 24, the very end of the third gospel, where we are told that the Torah, the prophets, and the Psalms all point to Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. This is clearly not the case. So Christianity is highly vulnerable because if, as it turns out, the claims of the church are not only torturous, but completely incompatible with the Hebrew Bible, so then it collapses. Judaism is not making a claim based on another holy book. So there's no therefore. This is truly the non sequitur. So it doesn't make sense to say that. It's just not logical to say that. Now, the question is, what about the Jewish faith? Let's just forget about Christianity, and we can do that. Christians do not have the luxury of being able to forget Judaism, because they're claiming that Christianity is the fulfillment of Judaism. John chapter 5, if you would have believed in Moses, you would have believed in me because he wrote about me. Well, he didn't. So that's a big problem, right? In 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul's asserting that the death and resurrection of Jesus is according to the scripture, well, as it turns out, there is no scripture like that. So these are phantom passages that don't exist. So Christianity is highly falsifiable because its claim is that the Hebrew Bible is all pointing to Jesus, and that is a fatuous claim, and it's transparently so, okay? All right, so we get that out of the way. So there's no therefore. I mean, even if you're an atheist, no matter what your belief is or your unbelief is, there is no therefore, just not logical. It doesn't flow. And moreover, I want to just submit this. Whenever you add another hypothesis in any area, it's just less likely. Like whatever likelihood you would assign to Orthodox Christianity, lowercase o, of it being true or not being true, it's just that much less likely that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is likely, because it's just another accretion. Every time you add another hypothesis, it's always less likely. So the original is the one that really has to stand up. The question, what is the basis of the Jewish faith? Well, it's very much like the basis that, well, an example would be a lending institution. You know, you can't help but walk through the streets of New York, Jerusalem, San Francisco, Chicago, and look at lending institutions, banks, and just look at the real estate they hold. Look at the wealth that these companies that issue your credit cards, they're making a fortune of money. They're making an enormous amount. I mean, they're credit cards, right? These are unsecured loans. If you don't pay, your full balance, they're getting unbelievable percentage rates. Outrageous, something that you could never get unless you did something very risky. So the question is, why, if banks are making so much money off of, credit cards, and they're making a fortune off of them, why doesn't anyone who applies for a credit card, why aren't they just issued one immediately? Well, when you apply for credit, what do you have to do? So if you're in the United States, you'd have to give them your social security number, right? That would be really important. In Israel, you'd give them your 2 Zahut number. It's the same thing. In any country, you'd give a lending institution the number that tells them about your financial history, and most germane about how you've handled loans in the past. And if the bank discovers that all the financial responsibility, all the loans that you've taken out in the past, you've paid back. So they're going to feel fairly confident that if they're ready to loan you money, this is an unsecured loan, that you'll very likely repay that loan. And the longer the history you have of taking out loans, incurring debt, but repaying it, right, the more likely it is, the better your credit score is going to be. And the more likely is that they're going to give you not just a loan or give you a credit card, but they'll give you a huge balance, where you can, whatever it is, the more the merrier, right? So that's what, now lending institutions are not guaranteed that because you have a history, but it certainly is all pointing in that direction. And if you have taken out loans in the past and not repaid them, they're going to deny you credit. Why? But they make so much money from it because there's a very good chance that you're just going to keep doing the same thing all over again, right? That's very much like Mark 9, Mark 13. Promises are just not kept. So the faith of the Jew is very much connected, embodied in our history. The credit rating of the God of Israel, in that we can look back in history, and it's a very long history. The God of Israel has, well, let me rephrase this. I'm not 63 years old, I'm 4,000 years old. It's a long chain of a history of God making promises to my people, right? And in every one of those promises, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has paid in full. Sometimes those promises were painful. You're going to go into exile, 70 years, Jeremiah 29, verse 10. I'm going to give you a Torah where all the nations will see your law, Deuteronomy chapter 4, and say, what a wise people this is that has such a wise law. How striking. More than half the people who share our planet, who occupy our planet, believe that our Torah is the word of God. The same chapter says, but they're not going to like you very much. You're going to remain few in number among the nations that you will reside. Deuteronomy 4, verse 27. So the text, same chapter, that's saying the world will marvel at your Torah, and they do. They're not all crazy about us. But I will preserve you, and you will remain few in number among the nations that you will reside. That's very striking because, if the Torah would say you're going to be very popular and you're going to be the largest nation in the world, like I could think of other peoples, other nations that have a very long history. The Chinese come to mind, right? But the Chinese, that's the most successful race on the planet. 1/3 of the world's population is Chinese. But the Torah is saying, no, it's not due to the size, the bulk of your numbers that you will remain for eternity and no one could ever destroy you. Maybe you think that the author is suggesting that you're just going to always be in the same piece of land, which is going to be enormous, like the Chinese have been there for a very long time on a very large geographical area. No, the same Bible says you're going to be scattered from one end of the world to the other end of the world. So the features that would contribute to longevity among a people will not apply to you. You're not going to have the land in common. It's not like it'll be the biggest hit in the world to be a Jew. No, the nations are going to admire your intellect and your wisdom and your Torah, but yet you're going to be hated. You're going to be a picture of hatred around the world. Nations will be aghast at you. You'll be expelled from nation to nation. Nevertheless, I will preserve you. That's the God of Israel. So the God of Israel has an amazing history of keeping every promise. So is there faith in Judaism? Yes. But it's a highly informed faith because the God of Israel does not lie. He does not change his mind. And he kept his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here we are today, thousands of years after these promises were made, in the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Jewish. The people of Israel have returned, and we have emerged from the ashes of Auschwitz. That's Jacob's trouble. Do you know what it means for Jeremiah, a prophet who lived during the Babylonian Empire, who witnessed, foresaw the destruction of the first temple, the first commonwealth, to peer into the future and say, there's a time coming that'll be an Eis Sorahi Yaakov, will be a great tribulation for Jacob. There will be no time like it. The worst thing that can ever happen will happen to you. However, this passage ends with two words, umimeno, however, from it, yivoshea, you will be saved. These are promises that are founded in eternity. Such a God I worship. Such a God I praise. Such a God I kneel before. So the reason why we trust in the TaNaCh is really fairly logical. It's really why we trust all sorts of things. I use an example of a lending institution. The reason we trust is because the God of Israel has kept his promise every step of the way. So it is a faith, it's true, but it's a highly informed faith. Such a God I put my trust in. Al tiftechu b'nedivim, put not your trust in princes, uven odom, she'ein lo teshu, or the Son of Man, where there is no salvation. Only put your trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what the Jew does. That's what the follower of Judaism does, which includes the B'nai Noach, the Chasidi Umas Olam. We're putting our trust in the God of Israel. Why? Because he has kept his promise. He is our only rock. He is our only Redeemer. The Lord of hosts is his name. Thank you for your question.
Right on, right on. And I think in the New Testament, Jesus is referred to as the Son of Man like over 80 times. And it says clearly, don't put your trust in princes nor in the Son of Man. Interesting.
Right.
All right, moving right into our next caller. And, of course, like in great fashion, I didn't put the right caller up. Give me 1 second. There we go.
It's so not like you.
It's not like me at all.
That's not you. That's so out of character.
Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
It's so surprising.
Right.
Hi, this is A from Tennessee. I'm calling to ask a question about John 20, verse 24 to 29. It's basically Jesus seems to shame doubting Thomas out of actually thrusting his hands into his side and into the piercings, because it doesn't actually say that he actually did it. It just says he saw and believed. So, I mean, it's common, even going back to ancient Egypt, for magicians to have ways of pretending that body parts were harmed or severed. So is this the only proof that Jesus died and came back to life, is someone seeing and believing?
Well, that's not what's conveyed. I'm just going to keep you on for a moment, just for a moment. So that's not what's being conveyed here. What's being conveyed here that Thomas doubted and he required physical proof, and then we are told, Jesus says, you know, it's really terrific if you can believe and not have to have that kind of proof. And this is really where the book of John ends. John chapter 21 is a later accretion. So that's what comes into view. But thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, go ahead and hang up now to me.
I just want to add to this point. There's something happening here that most people miss. So it's very striking that the story with doubting Thomas, that's so John 20 is really where John should end. 21 is probably a later edition, an added chapter, but that's not germane. What is germane is that this story appears nowhere else in the Christian Bible. So how did it get there? Why is it there? And it's not only the only example of this in the Christian Bible, but it's in the last gospel chronologically. The book of John was written later than the synoptic gospels. So why does a story like this, where we have the most visceral contact with the physical resurrected Jesus at the very end of the Gospels. This is very, very late stuff. So the book of John is written at the turn, right at the beginning of the 2nd century, maybe at the very end of the 1st century. This is very late, right? So why does such a story with such a visceral resurrection narrative? And just to contrast this, the book of Mark, which is the earliest of the 4 Gospels chronologically, really ends with Mark 16, verse 8, where there is no appearances of Jesus to the disciples. Like, you have none of this stuff. In fact, Mark 16:8 ends with the women who were there just frightened at what they had heard, that Jesus rose, and were so scared that they didn't say anything to anyone. The last 12 verses that you now see in a Christian Bible is a later addition, and the early texts of the New Testament don't have all the later passages, which means Mark 16, verse 9 through 20 is later. What a difference that is. So this really is a pushback against Paul. So I'd like you to think of it as a growth and a transformation in Christianity. So Paul's resurrection accounts, which are the earliest resurrection accounts, it's the earliest Christian literature to survive. The idea that the tomb was empty does not exist, never mentioned. Because in the ancient Greek thought, you can resurrect from the dead, and that doesn't mean your body is not in the tomb, because it's a spiritual resurrection. And Paul says so in 1 Corinthians 15. He doesn't use that language, but he makes it very clear that whatever resurrects is a spiritual body, strikingly different than what died. So what happens is you can chart this off, where the later the gospel, the more tangible Jesus' physical body is resurrected. So in Luke, which is probably 10 years earlier than John, probably. There are some people who place Luke into the 2nd century, but we'll just keep it conservative. So Luke, you have Jesus eating burned fish with the disciples, and the point is made in Luke 24, like, what kind of spirit eats and drinks as, obviously I am. So look at the story of Thomas actually feeling the body of Jesus as a pushback against another iteration of Christianity, which was Pauline, that the resurrected Jesus was a spirit, which would have been much more in line with Greek thinking. This is the one area where Paul lost and his opponents won, those who thought that it should be more in line with the Jewish view of the resurrection of the dead. So thank you very much for your question.
Oh, so much going on. This is good. Good. I love it when the phone lines are flooded. Bring it on, people.
Is this too complicated for you, this show? Is it very... It sounds it's like your workout here.
It is a workout. If everybody knew, if everybody knew how many screens and how many buttons and knobs and stuff that it takes to pull this off, it'll blow your mind.
Right.
We all marvel at you. I'll tell you.
Whatever.
We all do. We all marvel at you.
You're a turkey. Okay.
Really,
all right.
Please don't become a pilot.
Trey.
If you are, just let me know which planes you're Go ahead, please.
All right, caller, sit down. Be right back. Don't hang up. Yeah, there you go. All right, Mr. Bishop, you are live on the air. Please tell us what your question is today.
Hello, Rabbi. So at the beginning of Matthew, I think it's Matthew 5, there is a thing that Jesus says. I'm curious your opinion about. I'm trying to remember it. I'm not reading it. He says, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do men light a lamp and hide it under a bowl. Instead, they place it on a stand, so that it gives light to everyone in the house. In that same way, let your light shine before men, so they see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven." I'm curious who he's talking to, and what is this city on a hill he's talking about?
My dear friends, hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNaChTalk.com, TaNaChTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
Good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. I'm curious who he's talking to, and what is this city on a hill he's talking about?
Okay, Trey, go ahead and hand down to me for answer. Thank you, brother.
Right. So that's the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, and that immediately follows the Beatitudes, which occupies Matthew 5, verse 2 through 11, and that follows. What are the Beatitudes? The Beatitudes are blessed are those who are the meek in spirit, the poor, the weakest people. That's the key. So what comes through in the Beatitudes is that blessed those who are pure in heart, the merciful, that ultimately those people who are downtrodden will be raised up. That's the theme. And the Beatitudes are written using a unique alliteration, which is a writing style to keep them together, to understand they're to be read as a bulk. So it's a continuation of the Beatitudes. And that is that those people who hold fast to these ideas, who are and truly are blessed, will be held up high, whereas they were poor, whereas they were meek, whereas they mourn, whereas they are poor in spirit, whereas they will be held as a shining light and a shining city. So the idea that those who are low will be brought up high and those who are high will be brought down is a theme that triggered, I don't want to go off too far, but triggered questions in the 5th century as to why did Rome fall after it became Christian? Like, how did that happen, right? And Augustine, the church's most prominent church father, is going to write his magnum opus addressing that question of, like, here, Rome converts to Christianity, and then bang, Rome falls in 410. Like, how did that happen, right? But that's what's in view there. And then the Sermon on the Mount continues for 3 chapters, for the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapter of the book of Matthew. So thank you for your question. Were you on the phone with your stockbroker?
If I had some stock, I would.
Is that what you're doing? You got so excited about my conversation about lending institutions that
I had to make a quick phone call.
They're closed on Sunday, silly boy. Okay.
That's funny. I had to make a quick phone call. You're funny. Okay. Scott, you're live on the air. Please tell us your question.
So you're on the phone with his Scott broker.
Yeah.
There you go.
So just so you know, this is my good friend Scott Walsh. He's the one who actually came down from Dallas to put my AC units in. Good job, buddy. They still working.
Yes, amazing. Ah, yes. Okay.
Very nice. Okay, go ahead, Scott.
Hi, Rabbi. Thanks for taking my call and thanks for your time and all your work you put into this. I'll try to make it brief. It's kind of a little bit in depth here, so I'll try to make it as concise as possible. So when we look at Leviticus 26, there's a promise of blessing and then there's a promise of punishment. And so when you're reading about the blessing, it says that God will walk among us and bring peace. And when you put that in light of the concept of Mashiach, and then compare that to what Jesus was supposed to do, or in the New Testament as Messiah. Sorry, I'm going blank here, but one of the punishments says that God will bring a sword against the people. And if you compare that to what Matthew says regarding Jesus, Jesus said he didn't come to bring peace. He said he came to bring a sword. And so it's when you're also looking at all the concepts of Messiah, one of the concepts is that Messiah is not going to be a man. I mean, not going to be God, but going to be a man. But if you look at Leviticus 26, it says God's going to walk among us. So how do we reconcile all that?
You mentioned on the call about Jesus being possibly a curse sent from God.
Yes, that's right. So that's one of the things as far as Jesus bringing a sword is Jesus an instrument of God to bring a punishment?
Yeah. All right. That was a very good question. Thank you.
Okay, but go ahead and hang up now.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, later. Bye.
Sorry for all the confusion there.
Oh, you're good.
Sure, not a problem. This is I can only imagine that someone whose job is to install air conditioners might not be happy in the middle of the winter.
No kidding.
So my heart goes out to you. I'm kidding. It's funny that in Indonesia, so where I lived, it's almost on the equator, and at some point I noticed sitting in a car that the cars don't have heaters. I mean, the dial only goes blue how cold you want to be.
That's funny.
There's no heater. It never got warmer than. It never got colder than about 80 degrees. I don't think. It was just very warm. Anyways, how we got to that? Oh yes, the caller. So the role of Mashiach is to usher in a time of peace. We are told this explicitly in Isaiah chapter everything, including chapter 2, verse 3 and 4, that the Mashiach is going to give haichacha, rebuke, to the peoples. He's going to judge among the nations, and the nations will take it very seriously. Do you see what's happening today in the Holy Land? And that's going to come to an end. You see what's happening in Yemen? That will come to an end. You see what's happening in Ukraine? That'll come to an end. And there are more than 20 other wars going on around the world right now, many of which you've never heard of, but they're raging now around the world. That will all come to an end. So therefore, what we are told in Matthew chapter 10, verse 35 and 36, is that I didn't come to bring peace on earth, but the sword, and to set family members against each other, is exactly the opposite of what the Mashiach is supposed to accomplish. In fact, the Hebrew Bible ends in a Christian Bible, because it ends in the book of Malachi in a Christian Bible, that families, just the way the book of Malachi ends is that families will be restored, not destroyed. And you're probably wondering aloud, then how the heck did that ever creep into the book of Matthew? Like, how did Matthew 10, who put that in there? Like, why put that in there? Like, why did whoever wrote Matthew, why would that be thrown in there, that I didn't come to bring peace but the sword? Because that's really completely different than the messianic picture that comes into view in the Hebrew Bible. Like, look at the Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones. Just from verse 24 through 28. Okay, it's all messianic. That whole chapter is messianic, right? So 24, 25, we're introduced to Mashiach himself, who's called David, right? And then 26, 27, 28 is a covenant of peace and the building of the third and final temple. Like how could you get it? Why did they insert that into Matthew? How did that get in? So one of the things I've shared with you, not frequently, but those of you who pay careful attention to these shows, is that whatever you find in the Gospels is there as an apologetic. It's there to explain away a problem. And the problem obviously is, I mean, Matthew was written during the 80s probably, but the problem is that there was no peace. And not only that, there was enormous division, the trauma of the second half of the first century was a nightmare. So you have to change the rules. So it's like taking an arrow and just shooting it into a wall and then painting a target around it and going, bullseye. Well, that's what whoever wrote Matthew is doing, is they're inserting in an idea. That means they're painting a target around an arrow so it can't miss. So what the Christian movement brings is this enormous division and the sword and hatred and division and destruction. If you want to know what Mashiach is supposed to do, look at the first Christian century, and then it's the reverse. It's the inverse of what the Messianic age is supposed to accomplish, right? So that's why that passage appears so prominently in the Gospels. That idea is not unique only to Matthew 10, but that's a very prominent statement. I didn't come to bring peace, but the sword to set families apart, because what they're doing is they're painting a target around a piece of history that had already occurred. So, bingo, we got it. So thank you for your question.
Okay, sorry. I'm still on the phone.
Sure.
Burning up the phone lines, baby. That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. Guys, go to outreachjudaism.org.
Right.
Pick up this 2-volume book set, the audio files you'll find on his website, outreachjudaism.org. Just look at the free audio tab at the top, and it can be yours for a very, very affordable price. So
There you go. Thank
All
you.
right, yes, sir. You're welcome for that plug. Okay. Once again, I've got to toggle back here. Let me see which one that was. All right, Joseph, you're live on the air. Please tell us what your question is.
Yeah. So my question is, can you hear me okay?
You're loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So I live in a divided household, and the situation is about deciding how to raise our children and everything, and just looking for advice. When you presented someone with tons of scriptures and information and stuff from TaNaCh and from the New Testament as well, and they just won't listen, and it's really getting difficult.
Right. And that's between you and other members of your family.
We've always gotten along really well until this came up, and then I started really diving in and studying, and I read both of your books, and a lot of the stuff just caused me to raise tons of questions, and then that led to a lot of arguments and things like that. So
yeah, I don't have enough information to about you, but what I would just do is I would ask your family just to ask you questions and address their questions. Thank you very much for calling in.
One thing the caller said was he was wondering how to deprogram cult mentality. What's a way that he could, being in the home, approach that in a peaceful way?
What I try to do is to answer people's questions. Like, this is what we don't do on this show, is I don't come on the show and for an hour and a half tell people why I think they shouldn't be Christians, right? And I think that works out well, because I don't want to be pushed around. That's just my way. If I walk into a store and the salesperson comes over to me and right away is telling me what I should, it makes me uncomfortable. And so my sense is just the way I approach things is I go, I'm coming to this conclusion, and tell me what your thoughts are, and what about what I'm sharing with you resonates for you, and what about it troubles you. Tell me. So instead of explaining why you, the people I love, my family, should not be a Christian, it's very possible your family members are Christians for reasons that you're not sharing with them. It could be that, people are Christians because they're just terrified of going to hell, right? It could, and it has nothing to do with the passages that you're presenting. And very frequently, when speaking to a Christian, and Christians raise all kinds of reasons why I should believe in Jesus, when they run out of reasons, so then they go to the Talmud and the Septuagint. That never works out well. And then invariably they do the same thing. They tell me about how Jesus changed their life. What does it do with me, right? So, when Cassius Clay, he became a Muslim, and became the famous boxer, his life was transformed dramatically in terms of did he stop drinking alcohol or drugs, whatever it was. People in all religions go through enormous transformations. So what happens is it's very, very frequently the case that you're presented with one reason why you should be a Christian, and then when and it's presented as though there's evidence. There are hundreds of prophecies in the Old Testament that all point to Jesus. That's how the sales pitch always goes. Now, if you're not familiar with the Hebrew Bible, which most people are not, you won't know how to respond to them. You won't know that these claims are fatuous, they're vacuous. You won't know because you don't know enough about the Bible, and you're very likely to be relying on a Christian translation. Not knowing the context, you're in a lot of trouble. If you study it well, you'll be able to respond to every one of these claims very quickly, very fast. They're transparently false. And then invariably, the person tells you that about some miracle that happened to them. Like, Jesus spoke to me. Why does he speak to everyone else but me? Why isn't he speaking to me? He's always doing some miracle in the Congo, somewhere in South Korea. Really? What does it have to do with our conversation? Really? Is there a religion that does not have followers who've had miraculous or transformative experiences? So let's bring it back to your question. I think you should ask your family or ask whoever it is, like, why do you think I should believe the way you believe? Like, what's important to you? What's your criteria? People find it less threatening, and then you're addressing the issues that are valuable to them. It is very important to recognize that the vast majority of Christians know very little about the Hebrew Bible. Very little. They know, of course, the record of creation in Genesis, the flood. They know about Abraham. They know about stories of the Exodus. They know that. More likely from a movie or a coloring book than from actually reading the text. They have really no clue about what's going on in the Hebrew Bible. They've never read Leviticus. If they read it, they don't understand what they're reading. It's just the way it is. There are some Christians who are more studious, but it's very, very rare. So what happens is that Christianity just stands alone. It's not really based on the Hebrew Bible because they're not familiar with the Hebrew Bible. Christians are not familiar with the letters of Paul either. They're familiar with the stories in the gospel, and they see the four gospels as basically the same story. It's basically the same thing. That's what they do know. So I think that because I'm not a confrontational person, I think the best thing is to ask someone, tell me what you think is the most persuasive reason you believe I should be a Christian. Like, what's the most persuasive? And that could be very effective. Because then instead of using your criteria that guides you to what truth is, you're using their criteria. And if the response is, well, I just feel it, or I just know it, so then what sets your beliefs apart from other religions where the claim is, I feel I know it, and Mary talks to me, and whatever God speak to me, right? So, all all religions claim that. That's how I would address that. You see, there's one thing here. So I'll just say this to you. I have a fabulous family. I just lucked out. And my family are all the members of my family, almost all my family is religious, almost, not, but I could not imagine if any member of my family was not a religious. I couldn't imagine alienating them or damaging the fabric of my relationship with them over religion. I just could never imagine that, and I'm mortified when I hear that Christians will just throw people out of the family, and just cut them off, and just shocks me. Why would you do that? Like my family my immediate family, are all very religious Jews, but if one of them, whatever, didn't, I wouldn't stop loving them. So this is a little strange to me. It's just very odd to me. But I guess things like that happen. But I think the least confrontational way to persuade someone, in my view, is to just ask them, what do you think is the most compelling thing about what you believe? And then address that. And then you're respecting their criteria instead of saying, this is the reason why I think you shouldn't be a Christian. So I think that's probably very offensive. Like right away, if you would say that to a Christian, they're right away going to be very understandably very offended by that approach. So I hope that helps you. And thank you for your question.
Right on. Very good. That sounds good. All right, we'll move on to our next caller. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, I am Black Apple, and I'm calling from somewhere in Florida.
Welcome.
I got a question for Rabbi Tovia concerning the prophecies of the branch of righteousness that should come out of the house of David. According to the prophets Isaiah chapter 11 spoke of the branch or the root of Jesse that should come to rule and to smite the earth with the breath of his lips. And according to Jeremiah, the book of the prophet Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 30, I believe it's 23, 5-6, it speak of the branch of righteousness that should come, that will raise unto David. So in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 23, it says, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene. So Rabbi Tovia, based on my understanding, Nazareth comes from the Hebrew word netzer, which means netzer is Netser, which means branch or shoot. So my question to you, Rabbi Tovia, is that according to Matthew 2 verse 23, isn't this fulfilling the prophets or the prophecy concerning the shoot or the branch that shall raise unto David, and who Jesus fulfilled?
Well, just a question before you go. No one's ever asked that question before, so I'm very grateful that you called in. Why do you think the Messiah is called a branch? Like, why is he called a branch, do you think?
Okay, all right. Well,
just what are your thoughts on that? Like, where does a branch come from?
Yes, sir. I'm giving you my understanding right now. Okay, well, based on the candlestick, it has it has 7 branches, and the candlestick is like symbolic. The candlestick it's symbolic. It's symbolic. It represents a branch, and the candlestick gives light.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Thank you for your question.
Go ahead and hang up now, Tony, for your answer. Thank you.
Yeah. So the reason why the Messiah is called a branch is made obvious in the first passage of the chapter you quoted from. It's Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. V'yotza chayte migezer yishai, and a a shoot will come forth from the stump of Jesse, the netzer, and a branch, Misharashav Yifra, and from a branch from this from the root will bear fruit. So what Isaiah has in view is that Jesse is the father of King David, and there'll be a tree, and any of these branches who are descendants of David and Solomon is therefore eligible to be the Messiah. That's why there's just so many people throughout history who could have been a branch. Just as a tree may have hundreds, maybe there are trees that have thousands of branches, and any one of them are coming from the same root. So where this word netzer is coming from is the tree is what is in view. And I grant you that if Jesus really was from Nazareth, which likely he was, then that would be the only prophecy he fulfilled. So you're right, Matthew 2:23, you can say, when it says that the family moved to Nazareth, because Matthew's infancy narrative has the family begin in Bethlehem, go to Egypt, but they can't return back to Bethlehem because Herod Archelaus now is the titular head of Judea, so they have to go rather to the Galilee. And it was in Nazareth, because the prophets say he should be called a Nazarene. So you're viewing that as a fulfillment of Isaiah 11. I'll go, great, I'll grant you that. But what happens then is that you, like everything else, get into more trouble. Because if, in fact, the Messiah has to fulfill Isaiah chapter 11, then he has to fulfill all of chapter 11, not just one word of chapter 11. So, for example, when we're told that that these are the signs of the time, that the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the kid, that means there'll be world peace. It doesn't mean necessarily that wolves and lions will become herbivorous, that you might interpret it that way, but more logically is that there'll be complete peace on earth. And a young lion and a fatling together and a little child will lead them. There'll be no fear in the world. There'll be a universal knowledge of God. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 9 and 10 and 11, the knowledge of God will cover the world as the water covers the sea, right? And the children of Israel will be brought back for a second time. The first time they were gathered to the land of Israel when they came out of Egypt. The second full gathering of the Jewish people will be in the Messianic age. When the Jews returned to build the second temple, the vast majority of the Jews did not return back to the land of Israel. Most were lost in the 10 tribes. So the full restoration of the Jewish people to their land, the full knowledge of God, that means the knowledge of God will cover the world as the water covers the sea. Animals of prey will lie together without fear with animals who are predators. Okay? Whether you think that the digestive system of dedicated carnivores like lions will change or not, I don't think so. I don't know many people who think you can believe that. I don't think that's what's in view. But what clearly is being conveyed here is that the world will change for the better. Peace, universal knowledge of God, the ingathering of the exiles, the nation of Israel returning back to their land. My guess is that there have been at least hundreds of thousands of people who were born and died in the Upper Galilee, in Nazareth, right? That doesn't make them the Messiah. They had to fulfill all of Isaiah chapter 11. And when you go back to your pastor and he tells you there's a second coming, don't walk out, run out. That's the biggest red flag, that that you have a spiritual scam in front of you. There's nothing like that in the text. So what happens is Jesus somehow fulfills all the things that hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people throughout history were born and died or came from the northern Galilee, which is only about 80 miles from where I live right now, right? That's not enough. You need to fulfill all of it. So that's cool. But coming from the city of Nazareth, and I want to concede this point, because in Nazareth is such a place that it's never mentioned anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. It's never mentioned in the Talmud. It's just a nothing place. In fact, that idea that Nazareth was it's in the northern Galilee. What was there? People who were fishing villages. I mean, it was nothing. It was literally a one-horse town. So what good thing can come from Nazareth? So, but hundreds of thousands of people came from the northern Galilee throughout history. That doesn't mean they're all the Messiah, right? So I just would say to you this, that when the true Messiah comes, the world will change in a way that you can see. He will fear God, Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2 and 3. He will judge among the nations, not after the sight of his eyes. And there'll be a worldwide peace on earth where the wolf will lie together with the lamb, together. And no one will be afraid. A little child can play by a serpent's, by a hole for a serpent. No one will be afraid. What you see in the world, not just today, but in the first century, in the first Christian century, was filled with wars. In the year 70, just 40 years after Jesus' putative crucifixion, Judea was destroyed. The Jews went to exile. They weren't gathered in a second time. So let's just say, if I would concede that Jesus was born in Nazareth, you have all your work ahead of you. That makes the problem even greater, because if Isaiah 11 is to be our guide, is to be our measuring rod, is to be our light to guide us and to navigate our way to the true Messiah, if we are to use Isaiah 11, then he has to fulfill all of Isaiah 11, not just one word from Isaiah 11, verse 1. The use of the branch is really instructive, because the branch, just as a tree, I can't think of a tree that has one branch, right? And why isn't the Messiah called a tree? This is very important. Jesse is the root, and then we kind of skip the tree and just go to branch. Well, there's a reason for it, and that is in every generation, someone from the house of David and Solomon is there ready to bring about the redemption. So there are hundreds of branches. And Christians somehow miss this point, or they go one word, but where's the rest of it? That doesn't mean that anybody who comes from Nazareth is therefore eligible to be the Messiah, or anybody from the tribe of Judah, grant that is no. You have to do all of that. And then now, what would you do if you had a false religion? Please don't be offended by this. But if your religion was not a true religion, what would you have to say? Because the person you think is the Messiah did nothing except come from a city called Nazareth, okay, which a lot of people come from Nazareth. You would have to say that there's a second coming. That's the only way you can explain away a false Messiah. It's the only way, and that's exactly what the church is going to tell you, right? And going to then go, and the Jews are blind. The church has so much chutzpah, and we're reading the text, just plain reading of the text, and it is messianic. And all Christians and Jews agree it's messianic. And then the Jews are somehow blind. There's a veil over our eyes when all we're doing is just reading the text. So I say this, I grant you that sure, comes from Nazareth, he's from the city of Nazareth, whatever, fine. That proves that Jesus isn't the Messiah. If Isaiah 11 is the guide, is the measuring tool which we use to navigate and figure out who the true Messiah is, that doesn't prove Jesus is the Messiah. It's really quite the opposite. It demonstrates unequivocally that Jesus can't possibly be the Messiah. Thank you for your question.
Okay, Rabbi, I would be in error if I didn't remind you about a couple verses. He brought up Jeremiah 23, verses 5 to 6, and Ezekiel 37.
Ezekiel 37 as another example. The temple will be built, right? So how does Ezekiel 37 end? 26, 27, 28, that there'll be a temple, there'll be a covenant of peace. The restoration of the lost tribes. Take any of these chapters. What's vital is it's not enough to come from the city of Nazareth, but Ezekiel 37, the prophet is told to take 2 sticks. On one of them, inscribe Ephraim and his companions, and on the other, Judah and his companions. Put the 2 sticks in your hand, and they become one. Well, that didn't happen. So Jeremiah 23, none of these things occurred in the days of Jesus. So I say yes. The Messiah is a branch, fine. Good, but he has to fulfill everything, not just the part that you can't, there's no way to know even if it happened. I mean, I'm granting you that Jesus comes from the city of Nazareth. I think likely he was actually born there. And I think the notion that he was born in Bethlehem is a later development, and that's why it only appears in Matthew and Luke, and the idea seems to be dismissed in John 7. It's clear that the author of John didn't think that was the case, because when the objection came up, doesn't Messiah have to come from Bethlehem, the author doesn't make an effort to even correct that, but whatever. So I think, I can't be sure, but I think logically that he actually came from Nazareth. Fine. Good. This is what proves that Jesus is not the Messiah. Pick any of these chapters. You have the resurrection of the dead, the building of the temple, peace, ingathering of the exiles, the lost tribes, gathering all the Jewish people will be keeping the mitzvot. We have Mashiach in Ezekiel 37, verse 24 and 25. David, my servant, will be a prince over them, and they will keep my statutes and my laws. The Christians are saying you don't have to keep the Torah anymore. The law has been made a curse for us. Christ is the end of the law to everyone who believes. Romans chapter 10. That doesn't resemble anything found in TaNaCh. So I say, yes, I grant you that. Then all your work is ahead of you. That proves that Jesus can't be the Messiah. Thank you for your question.
All right, very good. Thanks for going back into that for me, Rabbi. All right. Caller, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Oh, wow, I'm live. Okay. Hi, my name is David. I'm calling in from Parsippany. Yeah, this is my first time calling in. I've been watching
Welcome to the
Rabbi's videos. Yeah, thanks. Mm-hmm. I've been watching Rabbi's videos for a while, but this is the first time I'm calling in. A little nervous. So my question is, something Rabbi Singer keeps bringing up is that in Christianity, right, you have like all these 3,000,001 different sects. You know, you have the Catholics, the Greek and Russian Orthodox, the Syriac Church, the Chaldeans, all different Protestant sects. And they're all bickering with one another. And that sort of presents it as some kind of flaw. But seemingly, in Yiddishkeit, you have the same thing. You have the Modoxers, the Litvish, you have all types of Charedim, you have the Chassidim, you have different groups who can't decide whether or not you should believe in Kabbalah or not, v'chulu, v'chulu, v'chulu. So my question is basically, what's the difference between Christianity having all those disagreeing groups and Judaism having all those disagreeing groups?
So I don't want you to
yeah,
leave. I want you to stay on.
Go ahead.
I want you to stay
don't
with
worry,
me.
I'm staying on.
Don't hang up. Okay. So that means we have to figure out what are the core fundamental beliefs of the Jewish faith, right? And I think we can all agree that the Maimonides best outlines the 13 fundamental principles of faith. And we would agree that if someone rejects any of those 13 principles, ikare ha'emuna, then a person's a heretic, right?
Right.
All right, good.
We do have those groups, though, like the Reformists.
Good. Stay
and the
with me.
Conservatives.
Just stay. Just
Okay,
don't worry
okay,
about
I'm
it. It's all
staying with
good.
you.
So you've mentioned a whole bunch of groups, Hasidic, Lithuanian. Of all the groups you mentioned, which one of those 13 principles of faith do these different Orthodox Jews disagree on? Tell me.
I don't think they disagree on any of them.
Thank you very much. I rest my case. We actually don't disagree on those issues, and the church disagrees on the most fundamental questions of the nature of God. Is there one God, and that's the Father, and the Son is a creation created later, as the man who coined the word Trinity articulated? Why was there a Council of Nicaea? Why were Christians bickering in front of Constantine in the summer of 325? It's not only the Council of Nicaea, but it's the Council of Constantinople that followed and other councils that followed. So Christians actually argue on the very fundamental core beliefs of what is the nature of God. And in fact, I would submit to you that the core arguments between Christians is the nature of the deity. And in fact, that's the massive argument between even Mormons and other Christians, is that what's the nature of the deity? Did the Father at some point become human? So, no, they're not the same. There are differences of emphasis. For example, we are not, the Torah has a prohibition that we should not, we shouldn't emulate and practice, imitate the mores and customs of the non-Jews. It's not a good idea to imitate San Francisco. Not a good idea. But the question is, to what extent? The daughters of Israel do not dress like the nations of the world. But to what extent exactly? Those are not doctrinal differences, right? Use your head. We don't disagree on doctrine. Now, it doesn't mean there's no Jewish group, no Jewish sect that did disagree on doctrine. What happened to them? Like the Sadducees, right? The Tzdukim. They rejected the oral Torah, the resurrection. Where are they today? They disappeared. They don't maintain the covenant. There were other groups that followed that. The Reform movement in the 19th century rejected core beliefs of Judaism. So those were real differences. Where are the Jews who embrace the Pittsburgh platform of the late 19th century in the 1880s? Where are their grandchildren today? Well, many of them became religious Jews, but most of them assimilated out, right? So what happens is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu preserves the covenant with those Jews who keep the Torah and love me, Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9. And the groups you've mentioned here are groups that actually don't disagree on the nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, don't disagree on any of the Ikrei HaEmunah, which means the fundamental tenets of faith. That is so incredibly different than the church, as an example. Does the Bishop of Rome, does he have an authority? Does the beliefs of the traditions of the church have any authority? That divides the Catholic Church from everyone else. You know, at the Council of Trent, the Council of Trent was the longest Catholic council. It was an anti-Reformation council. It lasted for probably 2 decades, very long time. And the Catholic Church, it was a response to the Reformation, right? And the Catholic Church said that you can break away by, of course, rejecting the Pope, but you're going to wind up having 1,000 popes. And in a way, they were right. And they disagree on fundamental teachings of the nature of God, the nature of the host, the nature of the Eucharist, transubstantiation. Is there a real presence in the Eucharist? And incidentally, notice what I'm going to do something a little counterintuitive with you. Notice what Christians don't argue about. So there's never been a council convened over the virgin birth, right? Never has the church gathered to decide whether Jesus was born to a virgin. Why not? Why? And there were so many Chalcedon. I mean, all these things are arguing over what is the nature of God? What did he emerge from? Jesus, who was he? Was he half human, half divine? Was he all God and all human at the same time? You're going, what? Christians who are killing each other over these issues, killing each other. What was the very nature of Jesus, of Christ? This is a massive fight. The church went to war over this. This is all part of history. There is no parallel to this in the Jewish faith, none at all. So I think that the reason for this, why are Christians not bickering over the virgin birth? Someone guess why. Why don't Christians argue over whether Jesus was born to a virgin? Well, you know the answer. The answer is that the Christian Bible says in 2 places, one in Matthew and the other in Luke, that Jesus was born to a virgin explicitly. See Luke 1:27, see Matthew 1:20, 21, 22, 23, right? So that you don't need a council of it. There's no arguments about that issue. Why not? Because the New Testament says what the principle is. What doesn't the Christian Bible say? That Jesus was God. There are only inferences that there's some divinity to him. There are. That's why Christians kill each other over that. That's a core doctrine. And Christians insist that if you don't believe what their sect believes in, you're going to hell. And I don't know many, maybe you know, I don't know many Sephardic Jews or Jews from the East who think that if a Jew has a tradition that's Lithuanian, that, Ashkenazi Jew, that their salvation is in jeopardy in any way. Quite the contrary. Here in the land of Israel, the daughters of Sephardim marry the sons of Ashkenazim and the other way around. And we carry the customs of the husband, right? Well, why do we marry each other and in each other's homes? Why? And why does she adopt her husband? Because there is no difference in doctrines. And those sects that became apostates, they're gone. Where are the Jews who became Christians in the 1st and 2nd century? There were Jews who became apostates. Their grandchildren are not with us any longer. Why? Because they lost the covenant. So, no, they're really not the same at all. And the church went to war with itself many times. In fact, the bloodiest religious war in human history was a battle between Christians where they slaughtered each other over the course of 30 years. 8 million Christians were dead by 1648. So, no, there's no parallel to this at all. Why? Because the Christian Bible does not have a clear statement of belief about the nature of Jesus. In fact, Jesus is almost always presented as subordinate to the Father, not equal to the Father. The Father is greater than me. And you have these passages where you can infer deity, most famously from the prologue of John. In the beginning was the Word. So, John 8:58. Very rarely you can infer Colossians 2:9, infer. But the clear statements in the Christian Bible, Jesus is not God, not equal to the Father. That's why Christians are killing each other, because it's not in the Christian Bible, because Christianity is a man-made religion that developed over time, and its Christology became higher and higher as time moved along, and the other sects were crushed by... It didn't work, of course, so Unitarians still remain. You can't compare the two. Yeah, it's true. Like, your big difference is, I assume you're from Parsippany, you said, so I assume that on Passover you don't eat beans, and your Sephardic brethren do eat kitniyot on Passover? What? Those are not doctrinal differences. Thank you for your question.
All right, very good. We'll move right into the next caller. Caller, you are live on the air. Please tell us your name, where you're calling from.
Yes, my name is Jose, and I'm calling in from Pennsylvania.
Welcome.
Well, first, before my question, I wanted to thank Mr. Hall for his program. I am definitely blessed with your program, Mr. Hall.
Thank you.
And I decided that I'm going to be donating, because I think it's very important that you keep on the air.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And my question to Rabbi Singer, well, before I ask him a question, he's a blessing. I know that he is God sent.
Amen.
Because in these days, he's the last prophet to me, warning the idolaters, of the Christians. They have their last warning, with the 2 volumes of the books that he has. It's remarkable. He is a blessing. Thank you, Rabbi Singer, for what you're doing. Thank you, because it's just unbelievable. And so my question to you now, Rabbi Singer, that I did get the 2 volumes. My question would be if there really is then a New Testament, or it's just finished at the book of Malachi. Because if 27 books have errors in the New Testament, then it can be authentic. And my second question would be, then that means that it's not Jewish, it's Roman, Greek. It can't be Jewish. So my question is, there could not be a New Testament.
No, the Torah, right. Very good. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you for your call.
God
Appreciate it
bless
very
you.
much. Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Thank you.
So, we'll just do a thought experiment for a moment. If you were God, we are creating the image of God, so it's fair to ask this question. God is infinite in his knowledge. He's eternal. He's all-loving, all-merciful. But we're creating his image, so it's fair to ask this question. If you were God and had an oracle for mankind, and you wanted to remain permanently, and recognize that later on there would be apostates who would say, we need to change something. We need to take something away, or it no longer applies. There's as you say, a New Testament, right? Although that word is tricky, the word is covenant, which has nothing to do with the Torah. Like, if you, God, what would you do? What fail-safe method would you use in order to convey that any religion, anybody who claims to be a prophet and says that something has become void in the Torah, then don't listen. Or is saying we have new commandments from God. Like, so what fail-safe method would you put in? I use the term fail-safe because it's a term associated with the nuclear weapons and how if the president wants to launch a nuclear strike, so there's a fail-safe method in place to ensure that a missile is not accidentally launched. It's really important, right? Because someone's carrying the nuclear football, right, is walking around with the president. But there's a whole series of methods in place to ensure that if a nuclear war is not launched when the president doesn't want to launch it, and that one is launched when he wants. I mean, you really have to be very careful with these things when everything's at stake. So if you're God, what would you do? You want to make sure that if a religion like Christianity emerges, which says you don't have to keep the Torah anymore, you don't have to. In fact, the law never really mattered. It was only a shadow, and the essence is Christ, right? So what would you place? What barrier, what prophylactic would you what would you do if you're sending this message to your chief prophet? How would you protect it, guard it, so that the people who are the followers of this faith, because this is an oracle that God wants everyone to keep for all eternity. Of course, if it applies to you, if you're a man, a woman, there are laws that apply to priests, those who are Jewish now, but they're all in place. What would you do? It was very simple what you would do. You would say that if anybody comes along later and says that we can remove a commandment or add to it, so that means he's a false prophet. Kill him. Wait, but he did miracles, Deuteronomy 13. Doesn't make a difference. I'm only testing you to see if you love me. I mean, that's what we would do. If I were a spy in Iran, and the United States wanted to take out Iran's nuclear weapon program, and you'd have to be exactly this time, and a message is sent to Washington that at this moment, at 2:00 in the afternoon, at this day, the whole radar system will be taken down. That's when to launch it. And if I was the plant in Iran, and I wanted to make sure that Iran didn't try to intervene, I would say that if anybody else claims to be a spy, know that he's a double agent, that he's not a real spy, and he's throwing you off. This is it. Follow this, right? It's really important to get that right. So that's why the Torah includes the language of, if someone says follow God, it's that your fathers didn't know, Deuteronomy 13. Why do I need that your fathers didn't know? Oh, because the nation of Israel are a nation of witnesses. So if your daddy didn't know about it, don't believe in it. If my father did not know about the doctrine of the Trinity, and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, after whom I was named, then don't believe it. Because the nation bears witness to the document. Atem edai nom Hashem avdi asher bacharti. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, my servant whom I have chosen. Isaiah 43, verse 10. Right? And the document attests to the people. That's why the Jewish people and the Torah are one, achadhu. We each attest to each other. So there is a fail-safe method installed clearly. It's no inference. No one could add to the Torah nor take away. Now, I know someone's going to ask the question, but aren't there customs that develop later? So I just want to get this because someone's going to ask the question. So in Shabbos, there are many elements of Shabbos things that are forbidden to do on Shabbos, including engaging in commerce. You can't buy and sell on Shabbos. You can't do that, right? A person can say, therefore, not only am I not going to engage in commerce, but the Jewish people would say is, as a protection, we're just not going to touch money, okay? Which we don't. But you're not allowed to say that muktzah, the rabbinic injunction, that we don't even touch currency. You don't pick up a coin on Shabbos. You don't hold dalba. Why? Because you're not allowed to buy and sell. So therefore, we don't touch it. But you're not allowed to say that's from God. You understand? So be careful. I know I'm going to have 5 million questions on that. So be very careful. You're not allowed to say that the reason religious Jews don't touch money on Shabbos is because God commanded us not to touch money. You're not allowed to say that. It's usher. It's forbidden. You can't say that. We protect, and in fact, we have in the Torah, you should protect my commandments. So we can protect the commandments by saying, I'm not, even though there's no violation to go to Las Vegas, I don't want to go to Las Vegas. It's not for a religious Jew. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that's it. So what you have in the Torah is exactly what you would have put there. If you were God, you would have, if you wanted to make sure that the Torah can never be void, can never be nullified, that it is forever and ever, and the Shabbat is eternal. It's an oti li olam, Exodus chapter 31, verse 16, 17. What would you do? Right? After all, the Torah was written for who? It was written by God for humans, not for angels. You would write it in a way that human beings could understand it. Right? And that's exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be his name, did. He said there, if anyone tells you that about a God that your fathers didn't know, do not listen to that prophet or dream Jesus. I didn't say, kill him. He's a false prophet. And in fact, the Torah says a very interesting thing. If you have any questions, very interesting. See, the document sends you back to your ancestors. Mine is so gorgeous. The Torah says, the document therefore says, if you have questions about faith, that's Deuteronomy 32, ask your daddy, he'll tell you. Ask your elders, they know all about it. What does that come to preclude? You can't then say someone invented this, because the document, if the document was invented by men and it's not of divine origins, so someone wrote it, right? Someone had to have written the Torah. Either God inspired Moses to write it, or someone made it up and said God did, and we can figure out why they would do it. But if you're going to invent a Jewish history and Jewish doctrines and beliefs, and you're making it up, you are not going to say, ask your grandparents, they know all about it, because they don't know anything about it. You just made it up. You see, every device is built into the Torah in order to protect its integrity. And it is not these teachings, these oracles, these principles are not only written in a way that only scholars with 400 PhDs can understand, but any child can understand it. Because it's simple. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you. And the Almighty, blessed be his holy name, installed these devices in the Torah to let you know. If someone comes later and says there's a new idea of the unity of God, run away. It's not from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Your fathers didn't know anything about it. So the Torah depends on the Jewish people. The Jewish people depend on Torah. And therefore we have a perfect relationship between God and Israel, who then, following that mandate, could live to fulfill the responsibility given by the Almighty to his people, and that is to be an Or L'Goyim. See Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6, a light to the nations. Thank you so much for your question. Thank you all for joining us.
Awesome. Good show. So we'll see you guys same time, same place next week, Hashem willing. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and turn on notifications. And also do not forget to go to outreachjudaism.org if you would like to get a hold of this set of books. And the website contains the audio files. Just click on the free audio tab at the very top of outreachjudaism.org. You can also go there directly to support Rabbi Singer's work. Also, he's got a donate link there. So you guys, we'll look forward to seeing you all same time, same place next week. Hashem willing. Shalom, everybody. Shalom, Rabbi. Take care. Peace, everybody.
Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNaChTalk.com. TaNaChTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.
חשוב והכרחי להיות ביחד. איפוק זו העוצמה, ויתור זו הגדולה, השאיפה